The wind moved like a memory over the shattered plain, carrying the taste of ash and rain. Distant thunder walked across the clouds, slow as a god with a grief it could not put down. The city below was a broken crown of glass teeth, each tower blackened at the edges where plasma had kissed it. Searchlights combed the dusk, and the dusk did not answer because the dusk was full of ghosts. He stood on a balcony of cracked stone, one hand wrapped in a blood-stained bandage, the other resting on the chipped rail where lichen had begun to return. He had the sort of face that survived winters, lean, severe, carved by years that made no apologies. He wore a battered Envira jacket with its seals long since dead and a dog tag whose letters had been sanded nearly smooth by time. His name was Ilia's Ward, and he had lived through things that should have killed him, and then kept walking. Below, in the leaf-littered courtyard, the banners of the Conquerors rippled. The alien cohort assembled there were tall and terrible. The Morcath, armor like wet obsidian, eyes like night water, voices a chorus of knives. Their leader stepped forward. The war spirit carried gave off a low hum that crawled over skin and bone. It looked up at the balcony, found the human, and smiled with the cold patience of a river that knows how rock breaks. "I'll kill you, human, if you don't kneel," the alien warrior bellowed, voice booming off shattered archways and the pale ribs of fallen bridges. The human just smiled. A small thing, that smile, not bravado, not anger. Just a thin line that said, "You have mistaken me." The Morcath leader, Kaar of the Night Reaches, tilted its head. It had learned this world's languages in the span between lightning strikes, memorized histories and earmarked them as transports to power. The humans were stubborn, yes, but predictable. Threatened their bodies and their gods, they fought. Threatened their children, they knelt. But this one did not kneel. Ilia's Ward rested his weathered cheek against the stone and listened to the city breathe. Far below the courtyard, in tunnels laid by masons whose names had fled the ledgers, there was the hush of wind through hidden arcs. There was water, patient and dark, shifting in cisterns older than any empire. There were the faint sounds of people trying to be smaller than their fear. He thought of them, and of a woman's voice, years ago saying, "It's not your job to save the whole world, Ward." He had wanted to answer, "Then whose job is it when everyone believes it is someone else's?" He did not answer, he only smiled. Kaar gestured. The cohort spread, boots clicking, bodies precise as a metronome. At the entry to the courtyard, a line of civilians, 20, maybe 25, were pushed forward, hands bound, eyes wide. A child clung to an old man's leg. Ilias's throat tightened. He did not reach for the pistol holstered under his coat. He could see by the weapon muzzles aimed at the captives that one wrong move would redraw the night with more blood. "We have taken your city's heart," Kaar called, as if reporting on the weather. "We have taken your signal towers and your orbital stones. We have killed your generals and your priests because rank and supplication are forms we understand. You are an old soldier, Ward. Kneel, and I will let these ones live to see morning." The storm murmured over the hills. He looked up at it and remembered an ice moon where the wind sang at pitches that made teeth ache. He remembered the breach at Aldoria, where the sky burned white for 3 hours, and the pitted asteroids fell like angels broken in transit. He remembered a tiny room the size of grief, where a child named Rex had wrapped his arms around a woman's waist, and sobbed without sound, because the Morcath had taken their voices first. Kaar raised its spear, a halo of power hissing along its edges. "Kneel." Ilia's Ward straightened, each vertebra a bell rung softly and spoke at last in a voice steady as steel under frost. "No." The word went out like a stone into a still lake, and the ripples touched every listening heart. The Morcath flinched. The civilians, some cried, some closed their eyes, some looked to him, and in that looking was the strange brightness of last chances. Kaar smiled as if discovering an unexpected spice in a meal. "Then I will teach you your last lesson." But it had already missed the first one. The storm over the hills was not only weather, Humanity had once built the city to be a sanctuary, and then the sanctuary had learned to fight. Ilias took his hand off the rail and whispered, "Now." Far below, hidden gears woke. The courtyard pulsed with a tremor no alien understood, the rising heartbeat of a hibernating colossus. In tunnels that smelled of cool stone and dust, the emergency systems he had spent the last 6 months coaxing back to life thudded into purpose. Shield baffles unfolded like hard petals from beneath the courtyard tiles. Pillars sighed as their inner cores glowed. The old city, sleeping, rolled over in its sleep, and the pressure of that turning pushed the Morcath back half a step. Kaar's eyes widened, then narrowed. "What have you?" The courtyard exploded with light. Not a weapon's blast, a dome springing into existence, pale as glacier glass, embracing the civilians in a tight, shimmering curve. The first volley of panicked alien fire splashed against it and was drunk like rain. The child over by the arch peered up, mouth forming a small O, fingertips pressed to the humming barrier. Kaar spun toward the balcony, fury flaring. "Tricks." "No," Ilias said. "Memory." He moved. The coat flared. The old pistol came up and spoke once, twice, 3 times. Each shot precise, each one cutting a line through a wrist or a weapon, never through a throat. Aliens screamed. The cohort staggered, regrouped. Ilias vaulted the rail, dropped to the cracked steps, knees bending, boots skidding on the algae-slick stone. He had no illusions. He was one man. He had planned for that. He ran. He ran not at the cohort, but to the wall panel whose face was a mosaic broken long ago by falling debris. He slapped an old toggle hidden behind a tile marked with an Ouroboros, and the city sighed again, this time with a sound like a cry caught a long time ago finally let free. Locking plates clanged in the distance. Old sluice gates opened. A deep rumble approached like the approach of something with many legs. The human had woken the bones. Water roared from vents around the courtyard like a sudden audience. It crashed in silver sheets, turning the floor slick. The Morcath scattered. Ilias slid along the wall using the slant, wading into the spray to vanish from sight, emerging behind the group guarding the prisoners. He raised the pistol and spoke 3 more precise words. The bonds fell. Eyes found him, startled. He met each one and nodded toward the western arch where the shield made a door no alien could see, but he knew the city remembered. "Go," he said. They went stumbling, carrying each other, overflow of fear catching their heels. A woman paused, hands shaking on the shoulder of the child. "You." "I'll be along," he said. She looked at him as if memorizing his face for a story, then guided the child through the light. The shield rippled. They vanished into the city's belly. Kaar roared. "Enough!" It came through the water and light like a storm given a body, spear a white fang. Ilias dropped, rolled, well aware that human bone was not made to argue long with alien alloy. He fired again. Sparks bloomed along Kaar's armor. The alien batted the bullets aside with contemptuous flicks of its forearm guard, then slammed the spear into the ground. The shockwave picked Ilias up and hurled him across the courtyard like a question that no one could answer. He slammed into a pillar and tasted copper and lightning. His arm screamed. He lost the pistol. It skittered away, arguing with the stones. Kaar stalked forward, a hunter savoring the kill. "You should have knelt." Ilias breathed once, twice, finding the bones inside the hurt and arranging them into a shape that could stand. "I already did," he said softly, pushing himself up. "Just not to you." The spear rose. The sky broke. A bluff above the courtyard crumbled, stones tumbling like the days of a calendar ripped loose. From behind the rock, a skeletal shape descended on cables. A maintenance drone older than the occupation, its once yellow paint flayed to gray by weather, its cutters repurposed to carry a coil gun fashioned from salvage. Sanctuaries become fortresses when memory refuses to die. From the balcony, hidden gunners Ilias had trained from street kids, and retired machinists opened up with crafted rifles. Metal rain stitched the night. Kaar jerked back, snarling. The coil gun hammered. The shield hugged the fleeing civilians like a mother who for a long, terrible time had had no arms. Ilias lunged, caught the edge of the spear, twisted. It fought like a captured storm. Their faces were inches apart, and for a heartbeat they looked at each other, not soldier to foe but creature to creature. Behind the black glass of Kaar's eyes burned something that might have been wondering. Not fear. Not yet, but the first cautious step toward it. Why? Kaar hissed. You cannot win. Ilias grunted, using the momentum of a man who had hauled rock for soup and hoisted friends off slippery slopes in nights all teeth. Winning, he said, was never the point. He stepped inside the spear, shoulder to chest, and drove them both through a sluice of water. They went down in a tangle. The spear bit stone. Sparks leapt and bit back. The drone's coil gun shrieked as the power bank burned white-hot. A cable snapped. The drone tumbled, hit the paving, and lay writhing like a stricken beetle. The gunfire on the balcony locked into a steady, disciplined rhythm. Kaar's gauntlet clamped on Ilias's wounded arm. Pain cracked the world. He saw white, then a deep far blue, like a lake you could drown calmly in. He used the pain as a rope and pulled himself back. His free hand found the short blade at his belt, a tool he used to pry open stubborn access panels and cut bread. He slammed it into the seam of Kaar's torso plating, not a killing blow, a reminder that everything has a way in. He twisted. Kaar screamed, short and furious. The courtyard's lights flickered. A boom rolled across the city as a hidden battery, coaxed into unwise wakefulness, gave all it had and left the world a little darker for the gift. The shield around the civilians wavered, collapsed, then came back. Weaker, Ilias's heart nodded. Move, he whispered to the city. Please. In tunnels, ancient pumps listened. They had no ears, no hearts, no minds, but they had purpose built into them, and sometimes that is enough. The pressure climbed. Gates jerked free of long rust. Water took a breath and ran. At the edge of the courtyard, Morcath reinforcements poured through an archway like oil set alight. They carried weapons that wrote their names in the air with buzzing light. The balcony gunners pivoted, fell, rose again, rose again. One by one their rifles fell silent. One by one they kept firing, because keeping firing is sometimes not about bullets but about saying, I am still here. Ilias broke free of Kaar, stumbled across slick stone toward the coil gun lying on its side in a tangle of cable and dying light. He threw his weight behind it, turned it toward the archway, found the manual trigger and pressed. The barrel flared. The front line of Morcath folded like grass in a wind. The second line tried to swallow the space where the first had been. He pressed again, and again, until the coil gun shuddered and died entirely with the exhausted relief of a machine finished with its duty. Silence fell in pieces, shattered and reassembled, as sounds of battle ceased or were carried away by the running water, which now swarmed the courtyard like a lobby full of old friends arriving all at once. The reinforcements hesitated, startled by the sudden current tugging at their boots. The water swirled, collecting in swift, muscular streams. It found the channels the city remembered, and in remembering it taught them to the present. The flood surged, picked up stone, picked up bodies, and shoved them through the archway in a battering wave. Kaar staggered, slammed the spear butt down to brace, and howled at the tide as if its fury could make water respect it. It could not. Ilias stood in the doorway to the western arch, chest heaving, arms trembling. The last of the civilians hurried through the light's fading curtain and vanished into the earth. He looked back at Kaar, who now stood knee-deep, peeled of some of its black armor. A predator suddenly reminded it, too, could drown. You will drown your own city, Kaar snarled. It's not mine, Ilias said softly. It's ours. He stepped back. The arch swallowed him. The city took him into its throat. Down a stair older than the year, people first whispered the word Morcath to one another like a prayer. He knew these tunnels. He had measured their echoes with a miner's lamp and a soldier's caution. Around him, the rescued civilians moved like a dark river. Some sobbed. Some laughed a thin glass laugh at odds with the night. A boy touched the wall and whispered thank you to it as if it could hear. Perhaps it could. He guided them with gestures, with the low chuff of his voice giving directions, with a humanity you could rest your back against. At an intersection where roots had packed in like muscles in a long neck, he stopped them. "Rest here," he said. "Drink. Wait for the signal." "What signal?" whispered the woman with the child, hair plastered to her skull, eyes bright as if fever had chosen hope over heat. She had told him her name was Sina. The child, cheek against her shoulder, watched him with the grave, skeptical attention only children have, as if deciding whether the world was a lie told by those who loved it too much. "You'll know," Ilias said. He turned and walked back into the bones. He found a service shaft where his shoulders scraped either wall. He climbed until his arms shook without stop. He had the ordinary body of a man too busy to be careful, but sometimes the world gives you a ladder you cannot afford not to climb. He reached a maintenance platform and crawled onto it on his belly, chest heaving. He lay there a moment, smelling the iron wet of night, hearing the far thrum of Morcath boots and the closer whisper of humans clinging to the new shape of their fear. Then he rose. The platform overlooked a power junction the size of a small chapel. A mural in old paint of saints with haloed eyes looked down on an array of converter spines. He had studied this place for weeks. He had dreamt about it until he could walk it blind. The Morcath used the city's grid. They are practical, he had once told the street kids. If they can feed from what they took, they will, and they had. The converters hummed with the breath of an enemy. He pried open a panel, teeth clamped in the pain of his arm, protesting the turn of the tool. He found the cable he wanted because he had learned to see as an electrician does, not colored cords but rivers of decision. He cut one. Sparks bit. He took the flare like judgment and did not look away. He spliced another, feeling for the sense of it the way a musician finds the key after the lights go out. He whispered to the city as he worked, nonsense syllables and old war songs without words. Sweat slid down his ribs. The world narrowed to metal and will. The signal went out with no trumpet. The lights across the lower quarter flickered twice, an eyelid flutter. In the tunnels, Sina lifted her head. "Now," she said, not knowing how she knew. The people rose. They moved as instructed, quietly, quickly carrying the children and the fragile bones, filing through passages that led toward the river cave with its roof cracked open to the stars. On the platform, Ilias watched a set of breakers trip in succession, like a drumbeat rolling toward certainty, and allowed himself a half-breath of relief. It lasted half a heartbeat. Boots. Armor. The air changed itself into the kind of silence that only happens when predators enter it. Ilias turned slowly. Kaar stepped into the chapel of converters, wet and angry, a strip of torn armor dragging along the floor. It had come through the flood and the fire. Behind it, 3 Morcath soldiers fanned out, cautious now. The spear's tip smoked, its hungry light dimmer but still eager. "You choose stubbornness over survival," Kaar said. It stared at the mural, at the painted saints whose eyes were peeled back into another world. "Is this your faith?" It gestured at the paint. "Or this?" It gestured at the humming machines. "This," Ilias said, touching his chest, "and those." He nodded toward the tunnels. "And her," he added, meaning not the woman, not even the city, but the shape that formed when people decided not to break. Kaar moved too fast. It was on him. The spear hissed. He jumped. The spear kissed his ribs, carved a line that would scar into the geography of his future if he lived. He fell into the control pit, a small square of shadow below the converter bank, and slammed into a switch he had not intended to hit. The grid screamed. The lights everywhere turned blue, a bad blue, the kind that means something is wrong and someone you love is in that wrong. He yanked himself to his feet and threw the switch back. The scream faded. Kaar laughed, a harsh bark that wanted to be a song but had never learned how. "This is not a battlefield," the alien said. "This is an altar, and I am the knife." "Then remember this altar," Ilias said. because it's where your war learns your name isn't the last word. He pulled a lever he had left wired to a sealed vent above. Wind roared. Dust filled the air in a sudden brown wall. The Morcath soldiers cursed, firing blind. Kar struck downward with the spear where Ilia's had been. He had already rolled, slid along the pit's lip, grabbed the side of a converter spine, and hauled himself up with the stubborn grace of someone too tired to be afraid. He grabbed the emergency release on the coolant line. It came loose as if tired of being asked to hold one more thing. Fog burst into the room, cold enough to sting. The spear's heat met the fog's teeth and screamed. Steam boiled up in a white wall. The saints on the mural vanished. Shapes became guesses. Ilia's moved by memory, by the tactile map he had built with his hands. 2 steps, grab the rail. 3 steps, duck the hanging pipe. Blind reach, find the manual trip. Pull, the main converter thudded into safe mode. Far away, lights went out in the Morcath barracks. He pictured them in the dark, disoriented as the tunnelers slipped past. Kar lunged out of the steam like a resurrected decision. It caught Ilia's across the jaw with the back of its hand. The world tilted on a new axis. He tasted lightning again. He hit the floor and did not get up immediately. He lay there listening to his heart swear at him, and the swearing sounded like love. "Why will you not kneel?" Kar asked, almost conversational now, as if it really wanted to know, as if somewhere inside its skull an old story had begun to gnaw. Ilias pushed himself up on his elbows. "Because we learned to stand once," he said, words thick with blood, "and after you learn that, kneeling is only ever to help someone else rise." Kar gazed at him for a long, strange moment. Perhaps a life passed behind its eyes, a hatchling learning a climb, a vow given to a night sky that did not care, the long cold of command. Then its face hardened into the mask it preferred. It poised the spear. Footsteps scuffed at the entry. A figure stumbled into the converter room holding a length of pipe like a staff. It was one of the street kids, Rennie, face streaked with soot, hair singed. She had been 13 when the invasion came. She'd learned to read by tracing letters on ammo crates. She looked at Kar and spat blood between her teeth. "You promised him," she said to Ilias. "You promised you'd be along." "Go back," he said, alarm flaring. Kar turned, amused. "This is the shape of your future." Rennie tightened her grip. "This is the shape of yours," she said, and slammed the pipe against the emergency detach on the converter spine. The locking clamp screamed and blew. The spine leaned. It moaned like a ship straining at its ropes. The alien soldiers shouted. One ran. Kar snarled and lunged for the girl. Ilias's body moved and his mind tried to catch up. He hurled himself between them, felt the spear burn a new star in his side, got his hands on the shaft and pulled. Momentum is a language few ever fluently learn, but he seized it now and wrote a single sentence in it. Kar stumbled forward off balance into the pitch of the falling converter spine. It struck the floor like a judgment. The shock punched the air from Ilias's lungs. The room shrieked, metal, steam, the high, pure sound of something designed never to fail, failing in a way it could not forgive. The ceiling cracked and bled dust. Rennie coughed, eyes streaming, and in that moment Ilias saw her mother in her, eyes set to stubborn, mouth grieving a future she had not yet had time to desire. "Run," he said, pushing her toward the exit with a forearm gone numb. She hesitated. "What about?" "Go." She went, grief a promise she could cash later. Kar clawed out from under the fallen spine like an animal out of rubble, bleeding a thin, dark fluid, a second mouth open along its ribs where the blade had worried earlier. It was slower. It was still terrible. Ilias didn't pick up a weapon. He stepped to the control pit again and found the manual override he had saved as a last prayer. He looked at the mural. The saint's eyes watched him through a curtain of dust. He looked up at the ceiling and saw a hairline that had not been there before writing itself longer across the stone. He looked into the place inside himself where fear and purpose share a wall, and he leaned on the wall until fear moved slightly to make room. He pulled the override. The converters, already hurt, went a full emergency reroute. The city groaned. Far away, doors that had slept a century opened their eyes and blinked. The river cave flooded with a gentler water, luminous with plankton that turned the evacuees into ghosts sliding through green fire. Sina held the child and wept without sound, because the sound would frighten hope. On the surface, the Morcath found suddenly that their light spoke a language the dark refused to translate, and in that conversation they were lost. In the converter room, one by one the spines died. The heavy hum wound down into a sigh that was almost relief. Kaar stared at the human standing in the control pit, body crooked by hurts, hands unarmed, eyes still and unbearably alive. "You will kill your city," Kaar said again, as if repetition could force truth to agree. Ilias shook his head, blood trickling over his jaw like an old acquaintance. "It will survive," he said. "It knows how. It knows cities do not know." "They do," he said, and smiled again, that same small smile from the balcony. "When we teach them." The ceiling gave up pretending. A slab fell. Kaar hurled itself aside, snarling. Dust buried half the room. Ilias staggered out of the pit and into a new dark where the air was a punishment to breathe. He carried himself down a hallway that had not existed a moment before because the collapse had made it. Sometimes the world provides maps because it cannot bear to lose you yet. He followed the dust to the river wind. He found the evacuees standing under a sky like a bowl hammered by a smith in a hurry, stars ringing with the faintest possible sound. The river was a black ribbon laced with green fire. The boat they had made from scavenged shell and hope lay waiting, its lines strung with little charms that clinked when the wind found them. He looked at Sina. "Go," he said again. "What about you?" she asked, because there is always that question and no noble story is honest without it. He put a hand on the boat's warm skin. He had meant to say a dozen things. He had meant to say, "I am tired." He had meant to say, "I am not done." He had meant to say, "My brothers died on rocks I cannot find on any map, and I am the last sentence in a letter I cannot send." He had meant to say, "Someone must turn away the knife, even if only for one night." He said, "I have one more lever to pull." Rennie stood on the bank, pipe still in her hand. "You promised," she said, accusation and plea braided into something that hurt to hear. "I promise again," he said, "and I keep my promises when I can, and when I can't, I leave the keeping to those I trained." She stared at him, then nodded once, as if knighting him and forgiving him for the sin of being mortal. Sina stepped forward. "Tell me your name," she said, voice rough. "Ilias Ward," he said. She nodded. "I will say it to the ones who live so they know who we were." She stepped into the boat, gathered the child close, and somewhere in her posture was a cathedral that even the night could not enter. He turned, back into the city that would kill him if he let it. He found the next lever and the next. He slammed doors behind the evacuees and opened doors in front. He rerouted power to the floodlocks so that the Morcath would find the streets suddenly channels that chose to lead nowhere useful. He whispered codes into panels that had never once been told they could decide anything. He stood in dust and heat and noise, and where a body should have been too tired to continue, he continued. Kaar followed, because some wars are less about territory than about two wills testing whether the other will break first. It moved through the wounded city, killing where it could, cursing where it could not. It reached a high passage where the roof had peeled back like the lid of a can, and there it saw the river below, luminous and full of impossible survivors, and it felt something that was almost awe. It had been taught that humanity was dangerous because of cleverness and rage. It had not been taught this, the quiet engineering of survival, the way one man could wake a city and make it kneel only to kindness. Kaar lifted the spear and threw. The spear became a streak of white hate. It fell toward the ghostly boats. Ilias was there, at the rail of a bridge that had once carried lovers and dogs and the last of the morning newspapers. He caught the spear out of the air with both hands because sometimes life provides no instruction manual. It burned him. It peeled skin. It sang through his bones and asked if he was sure. He set his feet. He was sure. He turned, his whole body a fulcrum, and threw it back. It arced, shuddering. Kaar raised an arm. The spear kissed the alien's forearm guard, bent the guard, curled it inward like a frown, and lodged in the stone behind. The alien stared at the weapon as if betrayed by its own name. Ilias leaned on the rail, night wind scouring his face, breaths coming like someone taking a few coins at a time from an almost empty jar. He thought of a woman he had loved once, on a planet much greener than this one, who had told him, "The problem with you is you treat your body like a tool and forget tools break." He smiled again, because she had been right and he had loved her for being right. Footsteps came behind him. He did not turn. He felt Kaar's presence like gravity. The alien stood at his shoulder. They looked down together at the boat sliding into the throat of the river where the cave roof opened into a dark-soaked canyon of starlight. Voices rose and fell. The river sang. The city's oldest heartbeat beat under it all. "You cannot save them all," Kaar said, soft now, almost kind. "The night has its own hunger." "I know," Ilias said, "but tonight is not the night it eats." "You're kind," Kaar said, "always thinking you can, what is the word, cheat the ledger." "We don't cheat it," he said. "We refuse to let it be the only arithmetic." Kaar turned. Its face was very quiet. "I will kill you now," it said, "not because you did not kneel, but because you taught others not to." He nodded as if receiving a verdict he had anticipated and judged fair. "Do what you must." The alien moved, and the world shrank to the width of a blade that was not in his hand and the reach of two bodies in the narrow geometry of a bridge. The dance was short. It is not romantic to say it was ugly, but it was. Elbows, teeth, the hard smash of skull against stone. The breath ripped out of you, the gasp stolen back. He had no elegance left. He had only a desire stubborn as a mountain goat. He pinned Kaar's hand to the rail with his forearm, felt a tendon snap under his weight, and he found he was very sad suddenly that this was what life sometimes demanded. He looked into the alien's eyes and saw there not a monster but a creature equally freighted by command, equally orphaned by its devotion to banners and oaths spoken too simply and kept too long. "I am tired," he whispered, not to Kaar, not to himself, but to the night. But not done. From below came a chorusing shout as the last boat cleared the dangerous turn. It was the sound a people make when they realize the future has not gone out like a candle in a draft. He closed his eyes just briefly and let that sound place a hand against the back of his heart and push. Kaar bucked. His grip slipped. The alien's free hand found a shard of stone, drove it toward Ilias's throat. He turned. The shard slid along his collarbone, pain like a wire pulled hot through flesh. He drove his forehead into Kaar's mouth. Teeth clicked. Light burst behind his eyes. He grinned blood and rain. "Stubbornness," Kaar gasped, spitting red onto the bridge. "Your faith." "Endurance," Ilias said. He did not kill Kaar. He knocked it to the stones, took its spear where it had lodged, and snapped the power cell from its haft. The spear died with a sigh that sounded almost relieved. He threw the empty haft into the river and listened the way you do when you're hoping to hear the end of a story you are tired of living. Sirens rose suddenly from the quarter to the east. Not Morkath sirens. Human. The ragged militia of the city had found the caches and the codes because he had placed them in hands that would not waste them, and now the city had teeth again. Hidden gun nests rolled up, old AA towers uncoiled like memories. The first bright line of a human-made beam slashed the night. Alkali smoke drifted like a veil over the ruins. Kaar lay on its side, chest heaving. It looked at the human above it, listened to the new sounds, and in its eyes flickered a thought it would never say aloud. They are not supposed to be this alive. It crawled to its knees and rose, swaying, the way a tide after a storm pretends it has always been gentle. It stepped back. "This world will suffer for defiance." Ilias leaned against the bridge rail because pride is for younger men. "We know," he said. "We will return," Kaar said. "We expect you," he answered. They looked at each other one last time, and it was a gaze richer than hate and more honest than peace. Carr backed away, vanished into the smoke with a fluid grace he could not help but admire even now. He watched until the night swallowed it. He turned and walked along the bridge. He failed and sat when failing was safer. He bled quietly into the stone. He looked up at the sky that had outlived everyone's ambitions and said the names of friends as if laying bricks into a wall that would hold against a flood. He did not go to the river. He went back into the city. He found the living, the wounded, the lost. He laid hands where hands could anchor someone to the world again. He sat with a boy whose father would not be coming back from the northern ridge, and told him something true that did not pretend to be comforting. This hurts because it matters. He helped lift a slab off a trapped dog. The dog licked the old soldier's hand and would not leave him. He used a needle and suture thread stolen from a closed clinic to stitch himself clumsily, while a mechanic named Saul held a lantern and told him bad jokes until his hand stopped shaking. "Thought you drowned," Saul said. He had a scar that made one ear look as if it had been folded by a child. "Not today," Ilias said. He stepped into the dawn that had come in despite the night's arguments. Smoke rose in long gray questions. People moved with that stunned hunger for doing that lives wake to after destruction. Someone had already started a pot of soup in a square. Someone had hung a line and was pinning wet clothes. Someone had drawn with chalk on a wall a crude picture of a boat sliding into green fire. He wanted to go to the river then to see if the evacuees had made the canyon and the canyon had made them into a future. But the city tugged his sleeve. He stayed. He coordinated not by shouting but by putting hands on shoulders and pointing and saying please. He wrote lists in a book that had once belonged to a poet and now belonged to what comes after poems. Triage here, food there, water there. He taught a group to use the drone's remaining cutter to slice metal sheets into braces for walls. At noon, the militia commander, Cade, arrived, eyes bright with the kind of grief that becomes focus if you're lucky. "You did this," Cade said, looking at the survivors, the stirring of order. It was not accusation, it was recognition. "We did this," Ilias replied and pointed to Rennie across the square, teaching two other kids how to clear a clogged drain with the patience of a saint and the mouth of a dock worker. "Listen to her. Don't waste her." Cade nodded. "What do you want for yourself?" Ilias looked down at his hands. They were swollen, split in 3 places, knuckles mapped with new constellations. He wanted to say sleep. He wanted to say a bowl of soup that didn't taste like sorrow. He wanted to say a letter from the green planet saying the woman with the right words had found a quiet town and a lesson she loved to teach. He said, "A radio and a map." Cade brought both. Ilias unfurled the map on a crate. Rivers, red lines, little faded circles where someone had once planned tourist capitals. He found the canyon. He found the place where the boats would beach if the river still ran as the old map promised. He tuned the radio gently, like a hand on a sleeping child's shoulder, static, then a cough of sound, then a voice. It was Sina's voice, thin with distance and with the line between this world and the next buzzing in its throat, but it was her. "We made it," she said. "We have air and a cave with a roof that looks like a marmalade lid. The child is asleep and does not know he is safe, so he sleeps properly. We count 73 souls. We will count more." He closed his eyes. The square around him stilled as if the city itself leaned in. He pressed the transmit key, thumb careful. "Good," he said, and in that single word was an ocean. "We will send more." He spent the afternoon doing that. How do you send more when the enemy prowls, carefully, and then a little less carefully each time you succeed, because hope is a bad teacher that way. They sent groups in shadow under tarps, through culverts where rats had been kings until their crown was taken by refugees. At evening's edge, a strafing run cut a street in half. He walked into the steam and pulled survivors out until his vision narrowed to a coin, and then to a thread, and then to whatever is thinner than a thread that still holds. He slept in a chair with a rifle across his knees and a dog's warm weight on his boots. He woke to another day and did it again. The Morcath did not break like pottery. They reformed like water. They took districts, they lost them. They tried the old tricks, hunger, fear, rumor. But the city had learned a new lesson: neighbors can be borders if they agree. Humans built kitchens where streets crossed. They set watch where watch had been hearts. They told each other, remember the boats, as if memory itself warded off bullets. A week into holding, Kaar returned. It walked down the main avenue at dusk, alone, spear replaced with a new weapon that hummed with a deeper hunger. Ilias met it in the square because some stories are rituals and it is rude to neglect your part. They looked at each other in a light that made even broken things appear holy. You could have been a great general, Kaar said. I was, Ilias said, for a time. Then I learned greatness is a one-way road with a cliff at the end, and I prefer roads that go both ways. You taught them, Kaar said. That is your sin. It is my joy, Ilias said. They did not fight then. Kaar turned away. It studied the chalk drawings of boats in children's hands. It picked up a piece of chalk and drew a narrow line of its own, a small mark no one else would understand. It put the chalk down gently as if it was setting an ancestor back on the shelf. We will return with a fleet, Kaar said. You cannot wake every city. I don't have to, Ilias said. Just enough. Kaar's eyes cooled to stone. I will kill you one day, it said. Not because I want to, because the mathematics of empire require it. He smiled, the same small, quiet smile, and it maddened the alien more than any insult could have. And I will live until that day, and after it others will live. It left, a small shape at the edge of a big problem, and he shook off the strange sadness it left behind like a coat. He went back to sending boats. Days slid into a new kind of time measured by meals and messages, and the taste of water that grew less metallic as the algae mats did their slow healing work. Children played in alleys where glass had once been knives. A baker set a tray of bread on a cracked windowsill and cried because yeast is a spell you cannot cast in fear. A woman painted the side of a cargo container with a forest she had seen in a book once. Men fixed the AA tower with parts from old cars and cursed beautifully while doing it. Ilias folded maps. He mended a radio with a thread of wire teased out of a rusted fence. He woke one night with pain in his side because scars are clocks that never tell you what hour it is, but you know when they are about to strike. He rose. He walked the square. He looked up and saw stars. He whispered the names again and added new ones. It was not an act of grief. It was an act of inventory. Then one morning the fleet arrived. It came out of the dawn like an accusation, hulls like black bones, engines that braided the air into ropes and pulled it until it sang. The city's AA tower woke fully. The militia arrayed. The boats hid in caves and under bridges. The children looked up, pointed, and were pulled back by hands that would break before they let go. Ilias stood on the balcony where he'd begun. He breathed the rain that would break at noon and make the streets drink for an hour. He keyed the city wide and spoke in a voice that sounded like frost having a conversation with wood. Hold, he said, not a long speech, not a list of reasons, just a command that held a hand. Kaar's voice came across the channel, translated through the city's password-broken systems, clear as clean water. Kneel. The human just smiled. The first ship dipped to strafe. The AA spoke. The beam reached up like an old friend and shook hands. The ship faltered, then grew a new plan and did not falter the next time. Fighters peeled. The sky filled with the arithmetic of those who believe victory is an equation you can solve with enough bodies. The city disagreed. The city wrote alternate math in light and rain. It bled. It held. Ilias moved through the holding. He picked up a boy who had fallen and taught him how to breathe small until the panic passed. He wiped grease off the face of a girl who had been under the AA tower's guts for 8 hours and told her he could smell the victory in the oil. He shouted once when someone froze. Eyes on me, he said, and his eyes were a closed fist opening. A missile fell toward the square. He saw it as one sees a letter one has been avoiding opening, knowing the content, hoping for a different sender. He ran. He grabbed the missile's fin as if tackling a greedy story, and the missile did not care. It ripped him along the pavement. The dog, whose name had become Anchor because he would not leave anyone who needed him, leapt and grabbed the other fin and went for a ride he would brag about for the rest of his dog life. The missile hit the fountain and, for reasons known only to the gods of explosives and fools, did not detonate. It wedged there, sulking. People screamed to move. Ilias climbed out of the tangle with blood in his teeth and laughed. Sometimes joy is feral and shows up where it does not belong. He pried open the seam and disarmed it with hands that should not have been so sure and were. Above, Kaar watched and felt the shape of the future shift under its feet like ice in spring. This is not how they are supposed to be, it thought again, and began to suspect either its teachers had lied or they themselves had been lied to. The battle lasted until evening. The fleet took its losses and learned something it would not admit. Cities that wake will not go back to sleep. The Morcath pulled away, promising return. The sky let go of its breath. Rain came. People stepped into it and let it wash blood into the drains, and for a moment the city smelled clean. Ilias sat on the fountain's edge, missile guts scattered in his lap, Anchor's head on his knee. He felt as if a key had been turned somewhere inside his ribs. He waited to see whether the door it unlocked would be pain or relief. It was both. Rennie came and sat beside him. She unfolded a piece of paper and handed it to him. It was a drawing, chalk lines captured in pencil, of the boat sliding on green fire, his tiny figure on the bridge above it, hands on a spear of light. Children draw truth with a cruelty and a grace that adults cannot manage. He looked at it and had to rest his eyes on the dog for a moment. "You promised," she said, "and look at you, still here." "Barely," he said. "That's enough," she said, and in her voice was the confidence of someone who has seen enough bareleys to know they add up. Night settled like an old coat. Fires burned in barrels. Bread was handed round. The radio crackled with Sina's voice naming new arrivals and the number of steps between their cave and a waterfall that sounded like 1,000 papers being crumpled and smoothed again. Cade set a guard rotation and then sat down heavily and asked Ilias, "What was the war like before this one?" "Confused," he said. "Loud, full of people who thought victory would make them quiet inside. It didn't." "What makes you quiet inside?" Cade asked. He thought. He looked at the drawing, at the dog, at the chalk on children's knuckles. "This," he said. He slept with rain in his hair. He woke to a clean dawn. The city rebuilt in increments that sometimes looked like accidents. He taught more. He learned more. He received a message from the green planet. A woman with the right words had found a small town and a small class who asked good questions, and she was alive and happy, and she hoped he was too. He cried properly then, with his shoulders and chest and all the muscles that hold a man together and sometimes need to be washed by grief to function. Kaar returned once more, not with a fleet but alone, as if testing a wound to see if it had scabbed or scarred. It walked the river path at dusk and watched humans light candles on steps that once led tourists to ice cream. It stood on the bridge where it had almost ended and watched the water make no memorial of any of it, just go on. Ilias joined it. They stood apart, a polite distance kept by those who could kill and had chosen not to for reasons that might be poetry or strategy or both. "You will keep doing this," Kaar said, not a question. "Yes," Ilias said. "You will teach others," Kaar said. "Yes." "You will die," Kaar said, not a threat, a fact. A sad fact, spoken by someone who had begun to understand that death is not merely an error state but a texture. "Yes," Ilias said and rested his hand on the bridge rail, feeling heat still in it from the day. "But not today." Kaar inclined its head, a gesture slightly altered by a new respect. Then today I will watch your city, and later I will report to those who think they owe me what I saw." "And what did you see?" Ilias asked. Kar looked out at the boats sliding in and out of shadow at the edges of the city, ferrying people and food and ideas. "Something I was not taught to name," it said, "something that will make the mathematics difficult." Ilias smiled, the small quiet smile, and gave the alien the gift of no answer. "Some lessons you have to walk to on your own." The alien left at dawn, and he watched it go, and if he felt that odd sadness again, he kept it to himself and fed it bread and made it a chair at the table, as you do with pains that will never leave and so must be made into relatives. The city continued. When the next fleet came, it came into a world that had reorganized around the idea of endurance. Networks of cities woke each other one by one, sometimes with letters, sometimes with refugees carrying maps in their mouths, sometimes with silence that said, "It is your turn to write the next line." Kar rose through ranks complicated by its new math. Ilias grew older in a way not entirely captured by mirrors. Children became fighters, and then refused to be only fighters and opened schools. The dog's muzzle went gray and he slowed, and one night he laid his head on the old soldier's foot and did not raise it again. Ilias buried him under the balcony and planted a tree there, and when it began to shade the stone he cried again, because shadow meant survival. One night, long after the first balcony and the first kneel, he stood on a hill above the city and watched light stitch a net over the river and the broken crowns. Cade came and Rennie came and Sina came with the child now tall and skeptical and certain. They stood in a peace that could not be guaranteed and therefore meant more than any treaty. "What are we?" the child asked, voice deeper now, finally convinced by survival to grow. "Human," Ilias said. "Is that enough?" "It has to be," he said. He wondered then if any of it mattered. He looked at the city, its lights, its breath, its new songs. He listened to the radio, to messages like sparks between far roofs. He thought of Kar somewhere under an alien sky, looking up, thinking about the arithmetic of endurance. He thought of the woman with the words teaching another class. He thought of the dogs he had known and the boats and the children who made rude faces at him because they could. "Yes," he said, "it's enough." And when another voice came across the radio, thin, as all brave voices are, and tired, as all honest voices are, saying, "They are here again," he smiled, not because he liked the fight, but because he recognized the shape of his work and the size of his heart, and they matched. He went down the hill. He did not run. He walked because sometimes walking is a stronger defiance. He entered the square and picked up the radio and said, "Hold." He set his hand on the AA tower's cooling flank. He tilted his head to listen to the generators breathing. He breathed with them. He waited for the dawn. He felt the city under him, deep, old, seated with the bones of histories and the roots of futures, and he loved it. The war had ended 1,000 years ago in some places and begun yesterday in others. But in this city, on this night, at this hour when hard men and gentle women agree they must be both, Ilias ward stood under a sky that had seen it all and would still be there when the names had faded. And he smiled one last time, because the work of not kneeling is the work of teaching the world to stand. And that day the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, thank you for listening. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.